Hi everybody, so thanks so much for edging me over the line to 5k. This channel has a bit of a funny history in that like a lot of my older videos are the ones that have been most watched. So I still get comments on them going like, yeah, it's a bit unfocused, goes on a bit, can you cut to the chase, you talk too fast, I can't understand what you're saying, could you improve the audio, all this stuff from stuff I posted 3 or 4 years ago. So hopefully you've noticed that I've addressed all of these things over time. And I'm generally keen to make this a more useful resource for players ranging from beginner to intermediate, as well as more advanced players who might get something out of my sort of more philosophical ramblings, shall we say. I've really enjoyed the ride so far, and I'm actually quite keen to make this a little bit more of a professional thing, while hopefully not losing some of the qualities that perhaps make this channel interesting or distinctive from some of the other excellent YouTube jazz guitar channels out there, such as Jens's channel or Christian van Hemmer or Jamie Holroyd or any of these excellent players and teachers who are all doing a bit better than me. So I'm hopefully going to take a leaf out of their book while not losing some of the shambolic charm that might attract you to this dumpster fire of a channel. Anyway, thanks very much. I'm also planning to grow my beard that way quite a bit to see what happens. So enjoy that journey with me over the continued lockdown weeks as I go full castaway and hopefully don't start raving too much about coconuts or something. I started doing these Jazz Guitar Cookbook videos, which are hopefully a little bit more pedagogical and a little bit more focused on things that might actually help people instead of me just vlogging my brains. Jazz Cookbook's trying to sum up all of that in a digestible format that might actually be useful to people for learning a little bit more directly, as opposed to me just like talking about whatever else and then playing guitar at the rate of knots for 20 minutes, which is how it was when the channel started. There are some people I think who prefer the sort of stream of conscious thing as well, because they're not necessarily looking for jazz guitar lessons, they're just looking to hear some kind of different angle on things, and that's cool too, so I'll try and make those videos as well. So Rob Hendricks asks about inversions. Bernstein talks about inversions are cool but just play the right bass notes. So when do you use inversions? And the answer is that the thing to be keyed into is always sound, so inversions sound different. So as a rough history, I would say inversions were quite important in early jazz. So if you listen to New Orleans jazz with tubas or whatever, you're going to find that there's often a set bass line. A classic example would be boom, 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 boom. That's like a bass line that you hear a tuba doing, right? And then, Django, I'm thinking of things like, he would play things like this. You'd have like a strong sense of bass line going on in Django's music again. And then when it came to the bop era, the bass changed its role. So you'll look in the real book and, like, unless it's a tune by Pat Metheny or something, most of the chords are going to be in root position. And then later on, I would say, with Metheny and fusion and all this kind of stuff, things started becoming a little bit more inversion-y again. So when you're playing straight ahead jazz on the guitar, obviously it depends on the context. So if I'm playing like, Darn That Dream on the guitar, I do want like the important tonic chords to be in root position, because otherwise it sounds a bit weird. That's okay, but if I then do like a first inversion minor there, it doesn't sound like the same progression. So you've got to respect the bass line. I obviously agree with Peter. When you play with the bass player, obviously you might want to stay out of the way of the bass register completely, depending on the style. So having little things that you can play like for instance, Darn That Dream. I'm doubling the root there, but it's kind of not in a completely egregious register. You could some players even kind of avoid playing the root. There's no rules. I can't give you a rule, but I can maybe point out things to be aware of. If you're thinking about inversions, you're basically starting on the right foot. Listen out for them. Gabriel GK asked about playing lines on 251. So I suppose Gabriel's question, I'll sum it up because I want to go quick, is about, for instance, in a tune where you've just got like lots of 251s, like for instance, Autumn Leaves, how do you stop that kind of harmonic rhythm dominating? So So I'm just going like, 2 5 1 2 5 1. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with that, but you might want to create more variety in your lines. So, one thing you could do is actually just like not connect the 5 to the 1, but and then you see? So I'm putting it in a slightly different place. I'm not, I'm thinking almost of like a 5-1 going into the E flat, for instance, which changes the emphasis of the song. And the rhythm changes. Obviously plays a, 1 6 2 5, which is fine. But what you can also do is go, 1 2 2 5 1 2 5. So you're going, and then 2 5 1. Okay, so that gives you a different emphasis, and it's all just like again, like you're thinking about the right stuff. I think by asking that question, don't always link the 5 to 1. I mean, that's a great thing to be able to do. If you can't do that, you should certainly practice your 2 5 1s, and they'll get you out of trouble 9 times out of 10. On most straight ahead stuff, but you can break up the chords differently. Inside Jazz Guitar says you are talented and funny. Why, thank you. Tunes with multiple 2 5 1s do you tend to... Okay, so I'll sum this up. This is a question about whether or not you think of how you think of tunes changing key. So the example this guy gives is Inside Jazz Guitar gives is Cherokee, where we move from B flat and then we do a 2 5 1 into E flat major. Am I thinking of E flat major as a separate key? No, I don't. The answer is I think of the whole A section of Cherokee as being squarely in B flat, but with chromatic alterations. So, for instance, the flat 7, and then it goes to minor, and we get that E natural there, the sharp 4 of the key, over the C7, and then traditionally that's a flat 3 there as well at the end of the first pass of the A section. It's an augmented chord on F, an augmented triad. So those are all changes to that basic B flat key. And if you check out, Mozart or any of these sort of like common practice, as they're called, 18th century composers, you're going to notice them using sharps and flats habitually, even when they're in like C major or whatever, And this is something that jazz picked up. So I think we kind of have now a modal understanding of key center, which is that it has to belong to the scale. But that's not how it's traditionally been. And I think these old standards, I mean, Ray Noble went to the Royal College of Music, right? Actually, he comes from my hometown, Brighton, originally. But yeah, he was a classically trained composer. So that's like a lot of them were, Victor Young, for instance, write music like Rachmaninoff, So it's like that kind of sense of harmony being based really on the functions of the chords is closer to that stuff. Of course, in jazz, we're free to drape whatever modal stuff we want over the top, and that's part of the fun. But in terms of how the chords function, I see those as being in B flat. One reason is because the way we come back from E flat major to B flat is just such a typical way of doing it. You see that so much, it makes sense for me to think of that as being something within the key, rather than we go to E flat major and then we have some other 2 5 which comes from, I don't know, that would be, the relative major if B flat was a minor. So, we're thinking of like D flat major there for no reason. Doesn't make any sense. We're just thinking like a standard way of getting from 4 to 1. Another way would be E diminished sevenths, which is kind of more of an old school traditional jazz way of doing it, right? So, yeah, I tend to think as much in one key as possible, I think. But, if you find it better the other way, what I think of as the Mark Levine way, fine, just don't make sure that you don't, think Just Friends as in C major when actually it's in G major or something, because that can be confusing on the bandstand. Other than that, it's your own business. But that's the way I think of it. Okay, James Weatherly asks, where can I use altered scale chords and tritone substitutions to go, aside from 5 dominant? So for me, like all of this altered scale stuff, tritones, everything else is about the voice leading. So if I take a 2 5 1 and B flat major, I'm going C minor 11th, say, and then F7 flat 9, and go to B flat 13. So you've got a nice little contrary motion thing there. That's an obvious use, you can use the altered scale or half whole or whatever you like to, or tritone sub, to get a motion happening there. Now that's fine, that's 5, obviously, you've got all kinds of ways you can resolve your, resolve your altered dominant into the 1 chord, and definitely practice that. But it's the same thing for, a secondary dominant. So for instance, if I'm B flat and I want to use a G7 to get into C minor, for the longest time I couldn't hear that sound on that G7 because it's not something that Parker plays much. G7 sharp 11 or G7 flat 5, probably more accurately, going to C minor 9 and then. Okay, so work on that voice leading stuff, because you'll notice how I did the G7 flat 5 going into the D on the C minor, so C minor 9th. That's the stuff. That's the good stuff. That's the stuff you should. And then even putting a passing diminished or going into the B flat. So I'm thinking about these chords being kind of melodic, I suppose, particularly about the top voice, but also the bass line. The whole function, as far as I'm concerned, of the tritone sub is to really change the bass. So, and you can also turn that, you can turn that into a minor 7th as well. So you get boom, boom. Sounds a little bit more like Ladies of Tramp, right? For instance. Hope that answers that question. James Woolley asks, how useful do you think the idea of avoid notes and hexatonic scales are? I mean, I don't use them. I had to look them up, actually. So avoid notes is this concept from chord scale theory, which is the idea that if you view any chord as being a static sort of thing, that could be expressed as a scale. So, for instance, Dorian mode, you would have a note in there which doesn't quite sit. So, for instance, I play a D minor 11th, all those notes sound great, but if I sit a B on top of that, it creates a dissonance, as you can hear, which you wouldn't get with the C, right? Same thing, obviously, the most famous example of that is C major. If I play an F over the C major, ooh, that sounds lovely, but kind of crazy and dissonant. Wants to resolve, right? So my main problem with the void notes is the name. I think we should call them power notes because they're powerful. They allow you to move the harmony. If I play a B on a D minor, and if I play a C, F now, I'm in the key of, play the F on the C, that creates a sense of drama, right? As do all of the chromatic notes. Yeah? That's what makes the harmony move. A good example of, using the avoid note is one that Mark Levine uses in the theory book, which is, in jazz theory book, which is, using that fourth of the F chord. Ya ya, bo da da yo, bo da da, bo do da yo. Ya da ya da da, ya da da. Not so much an avoid note over the D minor, and then ya does it again over the F chord, right? F major. So it's kind of it's a great sound, You should use that note with confidence, but you should be able to hear it. And in the minor key, the sixth. But if you're playing an isolated like D minor chord. If you listen to Charlie Christian, for instance, you hear that as a tonality in itself. So, plus there's the Jordan Clemens thing, Stephen Harris thing, which is kind of more complicated again, which is that, C is an avoid note over C major 7th. So, yeah, avoid notes, complex. I don't really like the term, and I think we should think about dissonance in a more grown-up way, to be honest. Hexatonic scales, again, like so much of it is so confusing, and I don't really want to spend so much time on this video moaning about chord scale theory. It's not wrong, I just don't think the framing is very helpful. Disempowering because it makes the student worry about playing wrong notes. Whereas actually, if I'm going to play changes, those are probably the notes I'm going to make a beeline to because they give me the shape of the harmony. So yeah, think of them as power notes, and those hexatonic scales, they might be useful if you want to play some kind of contemporary non-functional music. Is all resources, but I wouldn't say it's terribly useful if you're trying to learn how to play changes. Lydian over major 7th. So yeah, a lot of these questions seem to be asking me permission to do things. Yeah, sure, if you want. Why not? General process for important steps for learning and internalizing a new song. I would say, without question, the most important thing is to learn the melody inside out. And then the chords and everything else. So it'd be like melody, and then listen to what the bass is doing, and then the middle voice is much easier to hear once you've got that basic framework down, if you're unused to hearing changes in songs. And certainly anything unfamiliar, like Wayne Shorter, where I don't really understand the chord progression in the same way, or any of these non-functional tunes, I'll be listening to the melody and the bass. And that's a great recipe. I used to go from chord symbols. I think I've moved on from that to doing this now, and I think most people recommend this approach. You might have some other advice somewhere, I don't know, but that's what I would suggest. Says, these are quite long questions, so I'm going to try and cut them down, and I'll summarise. So first one, how do you handle the sheer amount of stuff there is to learn? And there is a lot. So for me, I just have to get like really narrow and obsessive about whatever it is I'm doing, and ignore because everybody kind of gets a little bit evangelical about whatever stuff they're practicing. So they're going, yeah, I'm doing the Barry Harris single note line stuff. It's great, or somebody else is going like, yeah, I'm just sort of working through all the hexatonic scales or whatever, whatever it is they happen to be doing that week. And you just have to ignore all these people and just focus on the thing that you're working on, because what they are working on doesn't actually matter. Everybody's different. Although it's always interesting to ask people what they're working on. I would say every budding jazz guitarist, especially those who are having trouble with playing, just generally, and don't feel happy with their ability to make music, can do to focus on these things. So first thing would be repertoire. Learn lots and lots of tunes, and again, the way of saying, learn a melody first, and learn the chords, and learn how the tune responds to the chords. Second thing, I would definitely say get really good at outlining everything in basic triads, right? And then 4-note chords, and then substitutes, and so on. Just do that in half notes, as I do in my video, which I'll try and pop up above if I remember to do it. Third thing, time. So really work on grounding your sense of time, downbeats and upbeats, right? Really important. And fourth thing, work in your ears. Just listen. So transcribe little licks, start simple, try and learn melodies by ear and chords by ear. Get comfortable with using your ear. Don't feel like you have to start transcription by jumping in and doing a John Coltrane solo that lasts for 20 minutes or something, because that's going to be too hard, and also you'll just get overwhelmed. So focus on something simple, like a couple of licks of Chet Baker or something, or the melody to a standard. That'll get you into the habit of doing that. The other question is, there's actually two more questions here. So learning jazz and using tunes as a learning vehicle. So this is such a good idea, I'm going to read it out in full. What do you think of learning jazz and using the tunes as a learning vehicle, so to speak? So learning the rhythm of a tune, the melody, and then just transcribe, not necessarily writing it down, 3 solos from people you like on that tune. After really internalizing these solos, start combining these licks and lines to come up with your own stuff on this tune. After that, try to use the same licks on other songs, and later, if you can improvise using this method, like 50 tunes, start looking at more advanced stuff, such as the BH Barry Harris improv method, for example. And the answer to that question is, yes, that's great, you should do that, and I should probably do it as well. I think, just be a little bit realistic about what you can get done, and anything you do by ear is fantastic. Again, spend some time in the melody, and don't sleep on the melody as a way of teaching you how to improvise on the changes. This is something that I've only realised in recent years, and it's mostly thanks to checking out people like Peter Bernstein, who are evangelical about this approach, so to speak, that I found its value, and I think the melody is a fantastic guide to playing the tune, funnily enough. Okay, who would have thought? Third thing, would you consider, this kind of answers the own question in the last question. So would you consider the Barry Harris single line method a solid choice of beginners in jazz improv? What are the prerequisites in your opinion? So, there's 2 questions again. The first, I would not recommend Barry Harris to beginners. I'd be interested to hear from people who are, Barry Harris influenced players, like for instance Chris from Things I Learned from Barry Harris, what they think about it. But from my own personal experience teaching students, it's too much, unless they already have a really good command of the instrument. So I think you'd be better off working on chord tones for a while and just getting that together, to be honest. and simple players like Charlie Christian, Grant Green are great for learning the basic ropes. Jim Hall, of course, And then once you've done that, you can start to dip your toes into the Barry Harris stuff or whatever else you care to do. I think also the nature of the guitar, the way it's laid out, means that learning scales and going out from scales can be a bit counterintuitive. It's better to ground what you're doing, as Charlie Christian did, in the chord shapes. Get a good understanding of that, because it's very natural to the guitar, and it's how many of the great improvisers on the guitar improvised, right? Okay, so if you do that, then I think that will help get to terms with the basic problems that people have about playing changes. And you should do that probably before you start thinking about scales. And then scales can actually be quite neatly, whether it's chord scale stuff or the Barry Harris method, can be quite neatly plonked on top of that and used to extend what you already know. It might be very different on the piano, because I think a lot of the stuff that's actually quite hard to get your head around on the guitar is actually really, really obvious and logical on the piano. Anyway, that's all I've got time for. I hope you find that useful. And as always, put any comments below. I'm going to, as I say, try and continue to improve and develop this channel. And I'm looking forward to the next 5K. So thanks for watching. See you soon.